Well, hello and welcome to today's Open Group webinar. You're all welcome. I see from the chat facility we already have a host of people from a host of countries from the world, and you're all very, very welcome. As you can see from the introductory slide, today's event is looking at improving government enterprise architecture processes through industry best practices and especially the use of TOGAF. I'm very pleased to be able to say that we have a very good and very experienced panel of presenters today who will be able to help answer your questions, and our lead presenter today is John Polgreen. Before I hand over to John to get the presentation going, I'd just like to cover a few of today's housekeeping issues. We would really welcome you to submit your questions. The most effective way to submit questions is via the Q&A text facility on the hand side of your screen. When you're doing that, please can you address your question to all panelists. You address it to host only, that will come directly to me. That's an issue because I can pass it on to the panelists, but it is easy if you address them from the start to all participants. Today's event is being recorded, and a whole recording of the audio and slides will be available on the Open Group WebEx Event Center page tomorrow morning. So without any further ado, I think I'd like to hand over to John and ask John to start the presentation. Over to you, John.
Hi, Simon. Thanks so much, Simon, for moderating this event. I'd like to say thanks also to the Open Group for sponsoring this event, to the Industry Advisory Committee, which advises government in the U.S., for also sponsoring the event, and from Architecting the Enterprise, the third for the event, and my employer. I just wanted to say first that this is a very auspicious event today because my cat, this is the benefits of having an office in your home, my cat brought a present for me, which was a small bird, I think a wren. The wren is currently flying around the house. So if it crash dives into me or something like that and you hear me scream, well, you'll know what that is. But I do think it's an auspicious sign anyway. So what is this all about for me on a kind of a personal level? I came into enterprise architecture in the U.S. government from rational, unified process-based software architecture. And so I looked around at the enterprise architecture that I saw and said, where is the process that I'm used to? I'm used to the very detailed process with the rational, unified process. And so that search led me to look around, and the result of that looking around was TOGAF. So and, let's get moving with this webinar. So first of all, our agenda, we're going to have some introductions. I'll introduce a panel. Then I'll go into the presentation, talk about why TOGAF for government. We'll talk about the strategic process, being an architecture at the strategic level, and coming down to the segment and capability or solution level, describe the process at that level, and then talk about the value proposition for TOGAF for government. We'll have a panel discussion, Q&A. Our panelists are Greg Letow from Component Wave. He worked on a large modernization project in the Department of Agriculture, U.S. Department of Agriculture, using TOGAF. Jones from Architecting the Enterprise worked with large government projects in the UK and is very active in the Open Group and has been for many years. Harrington, also from Architecting the Enterprise, worked with multi-level U.S. government projects and is in both the Open Group and the Industry Advisory Council. Depperly from Angel IT has worked with a variety of U.S. government EA projects and is also active in the IAC. Drowski, Component Wave, worked on a large modernization project in the Department of Agriculture using TOGAF. Armstrong Process Group has worked on U.S. government projects using TOGAF and has been active for years in the Open Group. And myself, I have worked with U.S. government projects with TOGAF and am active with the IAC. So a few notes on this presentation. I use the term FEA, FSAM, to encompass a bunch of things, a kind of environment that government enterprise architects work in, the Klinger-Cohen Act, FIA, the Practice Guide, FSAM, TOGAF to mean TOGAF 9, which is the latest version. Approach here is descriptive. I'm using the U.S. example. It may apply to other governmental situations. It does not. It needs careful analysis for application to particular cases. What's the situation? FEA has well-defined reference architectures. We got level guidance on process from the OMB and the CO Council. FM does guidance for segment architectures, but constantly reinventing the wheel. We have difficulty bringing new people on board. We need more granular process information, more templates for the types of artifacts and deliverables we're producing, more examples of outputs. And lastly, we need a common language. To a certain extent, we have a common language inside the federal government, but when we talk to vendors, when we talk to consultants, just have a language that we can communicate with them. What's the solution to some of these problems? I would say, and I think the panelists here and many perhaps in the audience, would that we can augment this milieu of federal EA practices with TOGAF. Some of the reasons here are that the TOGAF architectural development method is a well-defined process. We've got templates and formats that are available. It's accepted globally, provides common language. Popular EA tools, both TOGAF and FEA modules. TOGAF maps well to FEA, FSAM, and the FEA guidance. It is meant to be tailored. Nobody uses TOGAF out of the box, so you don't throw anything away that you're using now. You're augmenting your present practice with TOGAF. That's how it's meant to be used. TOGAF ADM can also map to DODAF. One panelist, Judith Jones, was a co-author of a white paper, an open group white paper that mapped TOGAF to DODAF. So what is TOGAF? TOGAF 9 is the group architecture framework version 9. It's developed by consensus in the open group. It has federal roots. Many people don't know that. It has a reputation in this country as being a commercial framework, but really its roots are federal. It started with DoD's Technical Architecture Framework for Information Management. Its architecture development method is well proven over many years now. 8% of Fortune 50 companies use TOGAF. There's also wide public sector use of TOGAF. The government is currently mandated to use it throughout the government, and many of the agencies currently have strong TOGAF projects going. And lastly, it's very well accepted among a lot of federal contractors. I get that from my personal experience. I do certification training, and every time I go out, I get people from the major federal contractors in my courses. They're going to go back and work on federal projects. So, core of TOGAF, I mentioned process a couple times before, and really the core of is the architecture development method, or as we usually refer to it, the AEM. What we're doing here is establishing the program in preliminary phase. We're conducting projects throughout this whole cycle, this whole ADM cycle. And we manage requirements throughout. And all of this is iterative. You might get back down here and need to iterate all the way back to here. So there's a lot of iteration that's possible in the ADM. Phase is made up of steps. So when I say detail, I'm serious about that. So for instance, for the business architecture, you first select reference models, viewpoints. Just go forward a slide here, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here, that TOGAF, let's say business architecture, has 21 different artifacts you can choose from. So you've chosen the artifacts that you want to produce here, then develop a baseline description, a target description, a gap analysis on your roadmap components. How are you going to migrate this business architecture, resolve any impacts that this architecture might have with other parts of the architecture, conduct a stakeholder review, finalize the architecture, and create an architecture definition document. Now, I'm just showing this to you as an example. The different phases have different steps, but all of them have this level of detail. And in each one of these steps, has a paragraph or two in TOGAF which describes it. Again, is the taxonomy of artifacts. This is new in TOGAF 9 and is very useful. It's tied to a meta model. For the first time, TOGAF has an explicit meta model. Now let's look for a minute at the FEA reference architectures. We've got here we have in common with business surface component, which maps to TOGAF's application architecture, data, which maps to data architecture, and technical reference model, which maps to TOGAF's technical architecture. It's significant, too, that the A is component-based. TOGAF uses the language building blocks, a very similar concept, and also that it's a business-driven approach. The adds further reference model, the performance reference model, which is actually in TOGAF of the business reference model or the business domain. So is at a high level how we can map the ADA practice guidance to the TOGAF ADM. So ADC strategy formulated and A's architect, and they can do that using these phases, A through D plus requirements management. Okay, well, to invest, they're using the TOGAF phase E, opportunities and solutions, and when they come to implement, they will use phases F, G, and H. And the outcome then is strategic results for the agency. So, e-practice guidance, the practice guidance says pretty explicitly that they don't cover EA development and maintenance. There's already a broad body of knowledge on these topics. And I would like to say that TOGAF is the compendium, that broad body of knowledge, more than anything else. So TOGAF has hundreds of pages of EA design and implementation. For example, the ADM business architecture phase that we just looked at has 9 main steps. Many of these steps have sub-steps, and there are artifacts that are described, and also we have examples so that we can look. So them have 2 or 3 different examples. And all of this is based on industry best practice worldwide. A couple of the people on our panel, Greg and Jim, were involved in a large Department of Agriculture project. And they wrote a case study where they found that TOGAF, together with FIA, gave a good combination for planning the kind of large modernization project that they were involved in. And they also liked the handoff between enterprise architecture as described by TOGAF and the rational unified process, which they're using as an SDLC. So how do we apply TOGAF to the federal environment? All we can do a strategic of the ADM. So here we're going to tailor our feed reference models, and also develop a strategic architecture which is mile wide, inch deep, 2B states in all domains, gaps, and a transition strategy. Okay, so basically we're going around the ADM, but this far because we're not actually implementing anything, which would happen here. Okay, so do that strategic architecture, and then we move on and do segment architectures. All right. So if let's say I worked for a while in the Department of Education, student loan, and the most important segment for us was the loan segment. So having a strategic architecture done would go into the architecture to describe that segment. Okay. And again, we're only going to F here, not actually landing anything on the ground. And then finally, when we get down to the capability or solution level, we'll go down the ADM the whole way, actually deploy projects, and then go into change management. So these subsequent ADM iterations describe segments, describe other enterprise projects. Collectively, all of these describe a rich EA both at the segment and the strategic level. So how do we run through this strategic iteration? I'm trying here to map the ADM to the federal practices. Preliminary phase, we're to establish our program, define principles, define our framework, which means tailoring FEA with TOGAF. Okay, we're going to define, prioritize our segments. We're going to choose the tools we want, develop governance, very important, and obtain approval for our project. Vision phase, again, very important. Preliminary phase, we do really one time, and we are finished. We can get back to it. But now we're going into a particular project. We're going to the project of defining our strategic EA, which should be a short project. We're only going inch deep here, mile wide, but inch deep. So our vision, we're establishing the project, identifying our stakeholders. That's very important in TOGAF terms, because that's also when we identify the artifacts that we're going to produce for these people. Define the scope of our strategic project, define the vision, the most important thing we do, and then get approval from our sponsor. Architecture, we are defining the AC. All right. So there is a generic PRM that OMB gives us. We're going to tailor that now to our specific agency. Same with the okay, we're going to tailor the bid reference model to a particular agency. We're going to populate that PRM on the as-is, populate it to be, and when I say populate, I mean we're going to develop the artifacts that we chose in the vision phase. Conduct a gap analysis, impact analysis, and we're going to populate those PRM indicators that we defined up here. Information systems architecture, In TOGAF, it's one phase, but actually two separate activities. One is to define your application architecture, and one is to define your data architecture. So here we are first defining our agency SRM and populating it. Remember, RM is a service component model. Populating our 2B, conducting a gap analysis, conduct impact analysis. Define our agency data reference model. In other words, OMB gives us a DRM, a generic DRM. We want to tailor that for our particular agency. Populate as is DRM. Again, populating it, I mean, take all those artifacts we identified in phase A and flesh those out. Okay. Populate a 2B DRM, conduct gap analysis, and conduct an impact analysis, and then finally populate the PRM indicators. You actually define those indicators in phase B. Now you are going to populate those indicators. In the technology architecture, we're going to define our agency technical reference model, populate the as-is TRM, the 2B, and conduct a gap analysis, impact analysis, and then finally populate our performance reference model indicators. Okay, so we say that phases A through D are really the architecting phases. This is where the EAs are really in control, and they're setting the agenda. And at this point, at the end of D, we have defined our architecture in all domains: application, data, and technology. So now in phase E, we are in a position to actually get solutions. Okay, so we're going to do a meta-gap analysis. We're going to our line of sight, which you in the U.S. government knows is very important, showing how you can have a direct line all the way from performance down to your technology layer. They're going to, looking at that gap analysis, say what solutions are out there to fill those gaps. Okay, and this is a point that you're going to invite your vendors in. The temptation is, and the vendors love it, is to invite the vendors in phase A. If you can at all avoid it, and I've got some vendors out there, and they're not happy to hear me say this, but if you can avoid it, wait to invite your vendors in phase E. Okay, you control the discussion of this. You have architecture, you know the solutions, the types of solutions you want. You can ask them, how can you help us? Okay, there's also we're going to identify buy, build, outsource options, identify your portfolio options, and also put together a funding strategy. Okay. So planning, we're talking about impact analysis. We're going to analyze costs, benefits, value, and risks. TOGAF 9 talks a lot about risks. It starts talking about risks in phase and carries it all the way through, all the way through to each. And then we do a detailed transition plan at this point. Okay, now, since we're doing a strategic iteration, we're not actually going to put anything in place. All right, so we're not going to do any implementation governance because that would be as we do implementation, as we do deployment, the EA team would need to be governing how those things are progressing. And the same is true for change management because we haven't put anything on the ground. There's no change to monitor. And the requirements management is happening continuously. All phases, input, revise, and output requirements. The most important things here is that you're entering these requirements into a repository, and that you're evaluating traceability. So subsequent ADM iterations, after you've defined that wide, inch-deep strategic architecture, you can describe segments. Do that. You've got FM, which is the Federal Segment Architectural Methodology. You can use TOGAF, or you can use FSAM tailored with TOGAF. I say probably the best is the final approach, FSAM tailored with TOGAF. Then so you can describe other enterprise significant projects, and these again collectively give us a description of a rich enterprise architecture. I wanted to quickly show you how we can map FSAM, the Federal Segment Architecture methodology, to TOGAF. Phase A in TOGAF maps to Step 1 and Step 2 of FSAM, which I think is pretty straightforward. Phase B directly to Step 3, Phase C and D to Step 4, and then phases E through F, E, and F to 5, and also developing the business case. Very clear and easy mapping. So if you want to use FSAM as your basic process, it's very easy to drill down into the TOGAF steps and apply them to FSAM. Okay, so run through quickly how you would do a segment or a capability solution architecture. So primary phase, we're just validating our previous iteration. We're basically doing the same things. Important here: identify stakeholders, identify the risks in our project, scope, always important. Business architecture, business reference model. We're going to populate the as-is, populate the to-be, and conduct a gap analysis, impact analysis, and populate our PRM indicators. Okay, same pattern here with the populate as-is, to-be, gap analysis, DRM, populate as-is, to-be, and gap analysis. Then populate our PRM indicators. The same pattern as to be gap analysis, impact, PRM. Opportunities and solutions, we do that meta-gap analysis, create our line of sight, identify solutions that could be applicable, make our reuse, buy, build, outsource decisions, portfolio decisions, create our business case, and define our funding strategy. My planning is pretty much, as I said last time. Implementation governance. This is very interesting. TOGAF's approach here is to establish a contract. Instead of throwing a 500-page document down in front of a development team, which they would never read, you condense your architecture down to those things which apply to their specific project, and put that in the form of a contract. Now, if you're using PMI, something like that, that could be a project charter. Doesn't even, because TOGAF uses the words contract, you don't have to use that terminology. Actually launch your implementation, conduct compliance reviews against that contract and the spirit of the architecture, measure performance. Okay, architecture change management. At this point, you have physically instantiated your architecture. You are baselining new architecture. So you go into change management. You're going to monitor change and determine the response. You receive change requests. Your response can be none, by way of the SDLC, in other words, development teams, or you might have to re-enter the DM and architects. Environments management, again, as I said last time. So let's wrap up now. TOGAF architectural domains. TOGAF and FEE are both driven by the business domain. I think they're very critical. TOGAF completes 4 FE domains, as you see on the screen. And through tailoring, you can accommodate the 5th domain, and actually the performance is really built into the business domain, so it really doesn't take much tailoring. And you could tailor for future domains things like security. TOGAF templates and examples. All ADM phases have suggested inputs and outputs. Most outputs have templates and examples, and most of these can be mapped to federal practice. Proposition. TOGAF and the federal practice. It maps well to FSAM CIO guidance. It provides a repeatable process, and that process detail that we really need. At common language. Certified tools that are out there, many of them provide templates and outlines to use with TOGAF. TOGAF is an open standard. It's technology and vendor neutral. It's intended to be tailored. It's inexpensive to use. TOGAF is industry standard. You have got 1,000 plus TOGAF certified architects globally. It gives you a lot of consulting resources. A lot of them are among large federal contractors. As I said, many are out there in the audience. Also small firms out there that are TOGAF certified. TOGAF simplifies communication with architecture teams, vendors, and consultants. Steps. For the EA community, the federal EA community, probably should study process. Is process a problem for us? Anecdotally, I think those on the panel and probably many of you in the audience would say, yeah, process is a problem. If so, is staff a fit? And there are agencies who would like to, first of all, download it. It's a free download. Visit blog. And they're having some technical difficulties with it right now, so you might not be able to find it in the next few days. But there's a lot of good postings on there about TOGAF for the federal government. Somebody on your EA team trained and certified. This includes, I think, trainers from reputable training firms with those systems and get somebody trained. Then tailor FSAM using TOGAF. Finally, your architecture. Develop it, implement it, and manage it. So time for questions and answers. Let's see what folks have sent in. Let's see. Hello, everybody. Okay. Hello.
Hi, John. Yeah, we have a few questions in the Q&A, and we've had some debating on in the chat facility. I know that Judith has been quite active in one of the debates on the chat facility. But in the Q&A, John, I see one question here. John suggested that the UK government mandate use of TOGAF across all departments. Do we have any examples of widespread use across the UK government, John?
Yes. Perhaps you could talk briefly about a good TOGAF success story in the UK government. If you could turn it over to Judith.
Hi. Hi. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Well, it's quite interesting watching people's response, but the UK government has been using TOGAF for quite a while, both when it started out as an IT architecture focus and subsequently as it's moved towards embracing enterprise architecture. So some of the major government departments like Departments of Works and Pensions, the Inland Revenue, HMRC, Others that have adopted TOGAF as their architecture method and approach. Things they've done is they've created often their own reference models which are indicative of their government work, similar to the way in which the FEA reference models have been created. And they have used TOGAF to develop their architectures based around that. So they have a lot of their own frameworks that they use. And there's about 40 or so agencies. Cover all the different lines of business of government. It could be social services, or it could be car licences, or driver licences, or highways agencies, and so on. And they have adopted TOGAF. UK government never seems to mandate anything much as such, but it never has anyway until this year, I think. So that might change a little bit over the next few months, but nevertheless, that's not their style to do things. It's an encouragement and success and leading by success. As a result, many of the agencies, don't ask me what percentage because I've no idea how many agencies there are, but there's at least 40 odd. So I know that quite a few of them have done that. And they've got TOGAF implemented at various stages. Some still using it for its IT componentry, and others, like the DWP, are investing in the business architectures area and looking how enterprise architecture as a whole can benefit their organisation and rationalise and reduce the costs, and how to get synergy across the organisation. So that's quite the reason why government do that is because they need to harmonise and work with each other. And so they do need to establish common terminologies, common process methods of doing things, common reference models, and they basically recognise that that's the only way in which they can get reasonable cost, reduced architectures and solutions there.
Thanks, Judith. John, we've also got another question from Glenn Icorvia. Governance during strategic iteration, how do you control changes and manage stakeholder involvement?
Ed, would you like to try that one?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure I saw. I'm not sure of the question. I saw it come up, and I'm not sure I understand the question. Simon, could you repeat it, please?
Of course. This is Glenn. It's if governance during strategic iteration, how do you control changes and manage stakeholder involvement?
TOGAF suggests that your governance starts with the preliminary phase. Governance should apply, according to TOGAF, throughout every phase of the ADM process. So just to clarify, it is very important from a TOGAF perspective that governance apply across the board. That answers the question.
I'll just repeat it again. So the question was that if no governance during strategic iteration, how do you control changes and manage stakeholder involvement?
I'm sure.
That question. We have one from.
Can I jump in for a second?
Corn, yeah.
Yeah, I think the conclusion is, and this is a lot of people, is that we have a specific phase called implementation governance. That is only governance of implementation, but governance of the entire enterprise architecture, as Ed said, is continuous and all-encompassing.
Okay, thanks, John. So the next question, this is from Anatab Aurora. How government and/or Fortune 500 companies handle the overlap between TOGAF 9 and ITIL, the key issues?
I know.
Do you want me to answer that, John?
Please.
The key areas with ITIL are when you're doing the solutions development and the implementation planning, the deployment planning, and how you're going to interact with the operations teams that are implementing the programs that you've defined. And this is the areas that ITIL gets involved with, change management consideration and so on, within the operations environment. So ITIL is actually primarily geared at IT operations. In TOGAF, we have put links into phases F, G, and H for the ITIL method. So we're able to show how ITIL and TOGAF interrelate and can share the common terminology sets at that point. TOGAF goes a lot further than IT. It's very much about the enterprise architecture, all the business change, whether there's IT related or not. So we say in TOGAF that we now have something we call the enterprise architecture lifecycle. Phase H actually is the areas that we do the realization of the value, the change management requirements that are needed, and then drive changes to the architecture through that process. Now, that doesn't mean changes to anything and everything. It wouldn't necessarily mean changes to a screen layout or anything like that. But what it would, because that's the concept of a solution, but what it would do is indicate what the changes would be to the architecture and any structural changes that might happen as a result. I suppose in an IT context like ITIL does, or in an enterprise architecture context, which is what TOGAF does.
Thanks, Judith. John, just walking down the questions, another question here from Richard Tong. How would TOGAF fit with agile implementation projects?
One on the panel interested in that particularly? I could talk about it briefly.
I think Chris Armstrong could talk about it very well.
Well, well, real briefly, we've certainly seen a lot of organizations adapt agile methods, but often find them lacking their sustainability as it relates to once a project claims victory in using the agile method. Organizations often find it very difficult to operate and sustain those solutions. And so I think a lot of the panelists, and I'm sure the participants would agree that in order for Agile to really be scalable and sustainable, it needs to integrate with the entire enterprise. And so there's a clear relationship between the two. A lot of people in the Agile community, I think, would look at the enterprise architecture function as the bad guys, and they wouldn't want them to show up. And I think trying to find that right balance between the constraints and strategy that the enterprise architecture community is trying to support, as well as trying to make the Agile methods work, is possible. But it requires a lot of coordination and collaboration. And I think TOGAF and the architecture development method call that forth really nicely through the continual emphasis on stakeholder involvement. Of course, a key aspect of TOGA and agility is how do you test an enterprise architecture, as that is, of course, a big part of Agile best practices. And I think, getting enterprise architecture content into the hands of implementation projects in a way that's useful and valuable is the most clear way to align the two different sets of practices.
Thanks very much. Moving on down the list of questions, we have quite a lengthy question here from Rob Austin, so I'll just read this carefully. It appears from the presentation that we're saying that the ADM provides a good methodology for use of EA techniques, a number of models, including TOGAF. However, this is not using the whole of the architectural framework. Is this correct?
Well, perhaps I could perhaps answer that one for you, John. What we're saying is that the architecture development method enables you to develop and manage architectures through their life cycle. Okay. There are also lots of EA techniques or techniques that are used to help either monitor, track, support, standardize the various artifacts needed by the architecture. And TOGAF also provides quite a few of those, which will help people get going. So you don't have to create them all yourself from the beginning. However, over time, what happens is that people do start to create their own versions and variants. And the whole point about the TOGAF framework is that it enables you to continue to use standards, innovate in your own environment, and still know that you know exactly where all the different touch points are. So, more like DODAF is basically an architecture framework of content. Like TOGAF now got a content meta model, and the same with Zachman is mostly about content. So these different frameworks can be used with the TOGAF ADM, which is mostly about method, is about process and how you use and develop architecture, what you do, how to make sure you've got all the different stakeholders covered, how you make sure your enterprise architecture is a success, really. And this is what the difference between any other frameworks or methods have been in TOGAF. So what has given is, in this world of all these different frameworks, it gives a hook, really, to put these different knowledge-based techniques and capabilities together. And you can use all sorts, including management consultancy techniques. So things like scorecards we recommend are used within the ADM, even if it's your version of the scorecard, to measure and track your achievements as you use the ADM. So there's all sorts of different techniques that TOGAF is able to accommodate. It's just knowing how to make the framework work for you. I think this is the thing John is focusing on now very much for federal government, or people using the US federal capabilities to try to work out how they could use TOGAF with those. And we can see that we've got lots of touch points, lots of ways in which we can use the reference models. So you've got a lot of synergy. This is with quite a few other frameworks that was mentioned, that the synergy is there to pull it together. It's a case of using TOGAF or nothing else. TOGAF does that harmony and synergizing all that body of knowledge together, whether it's a proprietary body of knowledge or an industry standard body of knowledge. So that's really been the key to its success, I think, so far, that people can see that integration capability that it brings across the body of knowledge of enterprise architecture. So as it started out from an IT base, it's actually moved quite dramatically over the last 2 to 3 years in terms of focusing very hard up on the bigger enterprise architecture space. And a lot of the new TOGAF stuff is creating maybe smaller federated enterprise architectures that can grow and be integrated with lots of enterprise architectures. So you could have 40, 50, 60, 80, 100 enterprise architectures all integrating and harmonizing with each other, so that you can get that commonality that we need in terms of understanding how various enterprises work and the differences between them, and to enable them to be able to partner and to work together. So I know that's a long sort of answer to Rob's question. So the TOGAF itself is now so big, and there's such a large body of knowledge around it, and many of these other frameworks. So you have to somehow in the industry pull these together, and this is the role that TOGAF adopted about 3, 4, 5 years ago, when we said we've got to do something to bring some standardisation and harmonisation in here. So that was behind a lot of the development work that's been done in the TOGAF space. I'm just going to answer a question that Sherry has asked. So she said, have a framework and methodology, or just a framework? Well, I would say that TAF is an architectural framework for executing methods. Okay, and many other frameworks don't have the process and execution aspect of them. They have the content that you must do an artifact that looks like this, or you need another type of output that looks like that. But it doesn't say how you go about making sure that the content that you're producing is the highest quality and the best value for your organisation. And that, I think, is where TOGAF comes in. So I think in you, it starts out as it's a framework that includes the method. So it's a true framework, okay? But it's not a static framework.
This is Glenn. Just to build on that a little bit more, I think that's where the marriage of the FEA and TOGAF is really, really great. The FEA does a good job of setting out structure for your enterprise architecture, especially in the government space, but I think it also translates over into the corporate space in a slightly modified way. But it's just a lot of structure, but when you take TOGAF, it tells you a lot more of the how, with the BRM being so prescriptive of the taxonomies, the SRM having all the taxonomies lined out. That's where the marriage of TOGAF and FEA really collaborates and makes those two work better together.
Thank you. John, are you happy to carry working down the questions we have?
Well, I've got a couple here that I wanted to pick on. Who had last? Was that Greg or Jim?
That was me. That was Greg.
Okay, Jim, you and Greg wrote in your case study that TOGAF was a great fit for a large modernization project. Can you tell us why you think that is a case?
Yeah, I think as Greg was saying, and Judith also, the EM for the process and give us a standard process to point to and say, here's the steps that we're following to, create our plan for modernization. What the FEA really provided was the reference models that provided the common ground for describing both the as-is and the 2D architectures. So what we did was basically, as we were starting the project out, is utilize the FEA reference models to really understand what the agency had. And we, for instance, inventoried current systems and mapped those to the BRM business functions that they supported. We took the current systems and mapped them to BRM component categories, which were really very general in the way it described what the component functionality was. Likewise, technical infrastructure to the FEA BRM, data entities to the FEA data reference model, etc. So by creating those mappings, we got a good picture of what the current environment, current architecture looked like. And likewise, when we transitioned to the target, or D, we took our business requirements, our new designs for target components, and mapped those to the same reference models. So a big benefit was that when we produced our roadmap, we could basically generate that out, and it was aligned with the FEA. So it was in common language that was, described in our required for submission of project approval and funding, and also it, helped us identify the dependencies. In a modernization project, understanding the current dependencies is very, very important to know, when I could migrate something, what I was going to migrate to, and to line up all the different areas of the architecture from end to end. So, as Greg had mentioned, the combination of the two, using the ADM as the process, using FEA reference models as basically the framework to describe, different architecture types, from business architecture to service component architecture to technical architecture to data architecture, really keeping those all in sync was what the big benefit was for planning a modernization effort.
Let's see. Ed, are you still with us? I know you had to take off.
Yeah, still here.
Okay, David, just looking around in your work with the Industry Advisory Council and with federal agencies, what evidence do you see out in the federal EA community that process may be a problem, and why do you think TOGAF might be part of the answer to that?
Well, I think as has mentioned that the reference models are a great taxonomy for developing content, but they're very non-prescriptive in terms of providing direction for developing the enterprise architecture. So it's really where the fit is, and that would be my answer.
Answers are good. Chris, just a quick question for you. How do OMB exhibits 353 relate to the TOGAF ADM?
John, I think Chris has had to go.
No problem. Let's see.
What was the question again, John?
How do OMB exhibits 353 relate to the TOGAF ADM?
Really, the exhibit 53 and 300s are designed for investment reporting.
Yeah.
Rather than developing the architecture.
Yes. I think that you would develop those exhibits as part of the activities of Phase E when you're doing all your portfolio management work. I know, Ed, do you have any comments on that?
I think that's where it would fit. Unfortunately, architecture within at least the U.S. federal government has primarily been an exercise in order to check off the Klinger-Cohen box, if you will, yeah, in submitting your 353 for obtaining funding for developing information technology projects. In some agencies, in many agencies, it's really started to become a good tool that people are using to really help drive the business and drive changes in the business. I started out as more check in the box, but now in order to complete the 300s and the 53s, but now I think it is actually moving into its own life and being of value.
This is Jim, and we found by planning modernization effort around the FEA reference models that we could date out basically the inputs to the OMB 300 that were in line with the FEA, and could describe specifically what performance indicating the solution was targeting, what business functions it was targeting, what common service components we were building, etc. So it was just a good byproduct from following that process that provided the inputs that the OMB 300 required.
I would agree with that. We did the same thing, very much so at GSA. We really, the architecture, developed a lot of the inputs.
You did a pretty comprehensive project in the GSA. Can you talk a little more about that?
Well, I'm sure I should, but I will. It was a very not specifically based on TOGAF. I have to be very straight up front, but it aligns with TOGAF absolutely perfectly. Actually, when TOGAF talks about developing a strategic architecture, a segment architecture, and a capabilities architecture, three different levels within TOGAF. We, at the company I was working for at the time, we developed what was the mile-wide, inch-deep view of the agency, and it was called GSA, and still called one GSA, and is just that. It took the entire agency into consideration. It uncovered a lot of stovepipes, a lot of communication across the agency, which was of benefit to the agency. We started doing segment architectures. We did a segment architecture for finance. We did a segment architecture for HR, and on. Out of which came capabilities architectures, which were those are the ones that led to actual implementation projects. So we didn't specifically use TOGAF. Boy, we were using it even though we didn't know it.
Thanks, Ed. Son, do you have more questions?
Yep, certainly do, John. Just one here. Why does TOGAF not explicitly talk about its connection to SDLC on this deal takes over?
The last sentence again.
Why does TOGAF not explicitly talk about its connection to SDLC or when the SDLC takes over?
Let's see. Who would like to talk about that? Judith, is that something you'd like to tackle?
Yeah, assuming you don't mean the SNA SDLC. So that's good. The reason is that we did have a look at the development methods and possibilities. And one of the things that TOGAF's done is it's developed a number of white papers around the use of TOGAF with these other frameworks and capabilities and development methods. Haven't as yet had anyone come forward with TOGAF and SDLC, and that will be really good. We had lots of promises over the years, but nothing's actually really materialised in that area. So that's one of the reasons that it hasn't made its the linkages into the TOGAF ADM, because simply the TOGAF is all about the best practices, voted and agreed best practices, And unless someone is prepared to put something up that the industry can discuss, then it's very difficult to just put something into the specification. That's not the way that TOGAF developed. There are been some references at some point to working with the development teams, but we tend to leave the development teams to find and use their own methodology, and there's many methodologies used around the world, and so we didn't feel that it was suitable to actually put something in at that point. But certainly there are key areas you can see where that is something that could link in there.
Yeah, and then to add to that, John, that certainly Phase G, the innovation governance,
Yes.
died the potential for the link to the software development lifecycle work, because what TOGAF really says is until a architecture is implemented and deployed, the architect should be intimately involved or involved to some degree, ensuring that from a governance perspective, that what is implemented and what is deployed is what was architected.
Yes, and I've talked to people from some agencies where the solution teams and the SDLC even start getting involved in Phase E with choosing the solutions, depending on the maturity of the solution teams. I wanted to pass this question also on to Greg because he worked on this issue on his Department of Agriculture project. Could you comment a little bit on that, Greg?
Yeah, one of the thoughts that went through my mind over the last few answers is that I don't have insights as to why TOGAF addressed it. Judith maybe have more insights than I do on that, but it seems like there is such a multiple target thing between all the agile processes, between the waterfall processes, between the homegrown and adapted processes that are available within everybody's own enterprise. It would be really hard to prescribe how to attach to an existing SDLC lifecycle. So I mean, to make sense that it doesn't quite go that far into it, because I think it's a hard target to hit. So I guess I can share some experience we had when we were trying to do it, where we kind of bridged the gap and made that transition. We used the early phases of the ADM to kind of gather all the background information, the business architecture, information architecture, data architecture, those kinds of things. And when we got into the phases E and F of the opportunity solution and migration planning, we roadmap it was a migration project, so that it lent itself very well to that. So we could see what was happening in each iteration, each phase of the project. And in that roadmap, having tied back to the FEA, we were able to identify service components that mapped back to the service component reference model. A lot of mapping, those service components, we knew what part of the business they mapped, which business objectives they were trying to help satisfy, which parts of the domain model and the enterprise domain participated in that solution. And it all came together into a service component specification. Now, I realize that's not an industry standard term that you can go out and find one out there. There's a lot of good starts, and we've pulled one together from several different places. But basically what our service spec, our service spec included was kind of like an overview section, an executive overview. So if service ever shows up in a repository, somebody can browse it and understand what's in it. A service consumer perspective, so if you're going to be the consumer of the service, how you interact with it. So what would be the interfaces, the public interfaces it exposes, and what requirements it really satisfies. And those requirements we started to identify. This was going on at the same time as some of the highest level use cases were being defined in parallel. To map the service components to the use cases that they participated in. And then the final view in our service spec was a service producer view. And that's kind of the first seed of what design would look like. So if you were to be the person that owned this service component for either development or to acquire it from a third-party COTS type structure. That would be the nitty-gritty details you'd need to know about that service component. By defining the service components as they fell in our roadmap, that basically gave us a seed into development there. From there, the development teams could take the service component specification. They understood what the public inputs and outputs were. They understood what parts of the business they were supporting, which use cases participated, or at least at the high level, and that was their transition then into their own well-known development process that they had.
Thanks a lot, Greg. Questions?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the time. We've probably got time for a couple more.
Okay.
Then I think we'll need to think about wrapping it up. Since SAM is a prescriptive methodology, why does TOGAF provide a stronger methodology?
So, take a swing at that.
I don't think we are in any way suggesting that TOGAF replaced FSAM. FSAM is doing things, but it is a very high-level description of how you should go about developing your segment architectures. TOGAF can supplement that by the details as to, and that's what TOGAF does. It provides you examples of specific artifacts that you might want to use in help in developing your segment architectures. That's it.
Simon, back to you.
Yeah, I think I said it's getting close to an hour and a half now, so perhaps we'd make this the last one, John. We've got a question here. How can the value chain be linked or represented in TOGAF?
Would you like to try this one?
Yeah. All right. Well, the question to ask is, what is a value chain? And it really looks at the progression of value in the business and how it's structured, where you find the value, what percentage of the value that the organisation creates, and where does it come from, and how can you model and structure that. And TOGAF does that at both a strategic level and a business capability level. So value chains are much about the capability of the organisation, and TOGAF allows you to create the capability architectures to support your value chain. You use the value chain work in the vision phase A, and then detail it in phase B in the business architecture and subsequent architecture views that you may take as a result of that. It's what I call a management technique that you can integrate and use within TOGAF quite easily to demonstrate the value and also communicate with the stakeholders, and certainly senior stakeholders, how their value of their business and organisation maps and is structured and supports that value chain. So the two go hand in hand. It isn't a one or the other. It isn't this is this one, this is another one. The value chain is just another way of deciding the value that the architecture can bring as well to the organisation. So,
and if I can add to that, Judith, that's exactly what you said is exactly what we did at GSA in our very level strategic, mile-wide, inch-deep view of the organization. We present back to the agency management in terms of the value chain the results of our architecture, because that was the thing that they understood. They understood the concepts behind this, the whole value chain view of an organization, and so we determined that was the artifacts that set of stakeholders needed to be presented.
Because all these different techniques, they all come together and show the links in the architecture and other aspects that are representing way in which the organisation or certain stakeholders in the organisation want to articulate their value or their capability. And that actually gives a very good framework for enabling them to do that. I mean, use TOGAF and never say the word IT in there at all, if you really wanted to. And we just, with certainly business, that perhaps that's how they should think, and they should think about TOGAF as enabling them to create their business infrastructure, and make sure that the IT infrastructure can be created, and then the two ought to be together. So the whole idea is to enable you to build that value across business, IT, of any sorts of facilities and infrastructure capabilities that you need to an organisation. Even if manufacturing and you're doing robotics or whatever, then even those areas can be included within the TOGAF methodology. Because the method is, at the end of the day, it's a way of doing something that allows you to harmonise, synergise, integrate a big enterprise working inside itself, also outside with its customers and its suppliers. And unless you have commonality of doing that, you just automatically have barriers. So the talk is about breaking those barriers down where you want to break them down, okay? And it ensuring, for instance, in the federal space, lots of agencies can talk with each other and know exactly where they are in their architecture life cycle and how it all works. So, there's lots of examples of this now.
It's I see we've got 2 minutes ago. I've just found a question which might be a really nice question to end on, if you agree. And the question is, what's the horizon for TOGAF? What do you think will be included in TOGAF 10?
Well, I will.
That'd be a good one to end with.
I will take a first swing at that, and I think that, and I think the last question is really kind of segue into this, is that business architecture is really where the greatest emphasis has to be, and we have to have a much better grasp of what business architecture is and how it relates to the other domains. I think that Judith said kind of leads to that. We're talking about looking at the whole organization, not just IT. We're looking at everything in the organization. So in Amazon, does Amazon separate IT from business? They can't. Amazon doesn't exist without IT. So there has to be a whole new way of thinking about what E is and so what business architecture is. And I think this is a work in progress, and we'll see a lot of changes in TOGAF 10. Please, anyone else who has some comments on this.
I wouldn't touch that. But no, John, I basically agree with you. I think what we're finding is that IT... Whoops, did we lose it? No, we haven't. Okay. IT is so integral to the success of any business today, that this divide, this dichotomy that exists today between IT and, quote, the business has got to completely disappear.
Yeah.
IT is a function that supplies value to the business. That's what it is.
I endorse that.
I'll get off my soapbox now.
TOGAF 10, I don't think there's anything called TOGAF 10 on the horizon that we're aware of at the moment. That I think we've got to use the existing TOGAF 9 as a base to develop further the knowledge in the industry, to share experiences so that we are in a position to have something called TOGAF 10. Certainly, I think the Open Group's intention that TOGAF will continue to be a body of knowledge that grows and grows, and that's the environment they're creating for it. I agree with John that business architecture is the area that we need to focus on more. There's an awful lot more in business architecture than some of the things we've seen so far, and I would agree. Even some people might say, well, it isn't business architecture, even TOGAF, but I would say, I haven't seen anything better anywhere else about business architecture. I'd be very delighted if someone can point me at something. I think that's the key to grow in, and that understanding of how enterprises work together, interoperability between enterprises, and understanding where the barriers are. As the guys will know, when I talk about enterprise, I have this vision of global enterprise architecture stretching all around the world, so that organisations can work with each other, whether it's government, business, or whatever, in a way that is cost effective. At the end of the day, this is all about reducing waste and trying to not do things unnecessarily, that we can then all share fairly and discreetly with the relevant organisations around the world. So we're in a position to be able to have a global enterprise architecture and work together. Whether we see that in year 2, 5, 10, 50, my lifetime, I don't know. But I think this has got to be the direction the world goes in. We are global and need to be seen as a global environment. So the next step, business architecture, definitely where we have to go. But I also think it's linking in to the senior management decision processes, whatever they are, and that's not just at business level, that could be in other areas as well.
Speaking of business architecture, that's really going to be one of the big focal areas at the next TOGAF conference, Open Group conference, coming up in Boston. Son, can you give participants the details of that conference?
Yes, of course, John. Yes, the next Open Group conference is going to be held in Boston, USA, and that's between the 19th and the 26th of July. What I think the attendees will have interest is this will be the first conference where there will be a TOGAF camp. And I think this is an ideal opportunity for enterprise architects and industry professionals really to get together and share experiences and other people's work and success stories and learning points. So we would thoroughly encourage everyone who's interested in this subject to take a look at that website. It can be accessed via the Open Group's homepage and see if there's anything in there that they would find of interest.
Very much, Simon. And thank you all so much for joining us today. On behalf of Architecting the Enterprise and the Industry Advisory Council, I've been really, really pleased with the turnout and the quality of the questions today. Son, do you have last words?
Yeah, to reiterate what you've said there, John, I'd like to thank yourself, and I'd like to thank the panel. I think we've had a really interesting debate going on chat, and we've had some really good questions and answer sessions. Just to reiterate, a full audio and slide recording of this event will be available via the Open Group WEX Event Center, and there's a link there to view event recordings, and that will be going live tomorrow morning. So happy, John. I think we'll call it a day there, and we'll shut the event down and look forward to the next webinar.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you. We'll meet
you
you at the
all.
hub.
Thanks. Bye. Thank you, everybody.